You are in an elevator with one other person. The doors slide shut. Nobody speaks. And within about 4 seconds, something in you begins to squirm. You study the floor numbers, as if they were fascinating. You pull out your phone, you clear your throat, anything to break it. The silence has become almost unbearable, and neither of you has said a word about why. You have felt this everywhere, in a lull in conversation at dinner, in the pause after you ask a question no one answers, in a car ride where the talking has run out and the quiet begins to feel like a presence sitting in the back seat. Most people assume silence is simply awkward, a small social hiccup, nothing more. But the real answer is far stranger. Because the discomfort you feel in silence is not about the silence at all. It is your brain, doing exactly what it evolved to do, screaming that something has gone wrong. To understand why, you have to understand what silence meant for almost all of human history. For your distant ancestors, sound was safety. The chatter of the group, the crackle of the fire, the ordinary noise of people living close together. This was the sound of a functioning world. It meant the tribe was near. It meant no predator had scattered them. It meant the machinery of survival was running. And silence, sudden silence, meant the opposite. When the birds stop singing, a hawk is overhead. When the insects go quiet, something large is moving through the grass. When the group falls silent, everyone has frozen for a reason. In the natural world, silence is not peace. Silence is the held breath before something happens. Your nervous system learned this over millions of years, and it did not forget. So when you sit in an unexpected silence, a part of your brain, older than language, interprets it as a signal. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of a threat you have not identified yet. That squirming feeling is an alarm. Your body is quietly asking, why has everything gone quiet? What are we not seeing? But there is a second layer, and it is deeply human, because silence between people is never really silent to your brain. It is loud with meaning. When someone stops talking, your social mind lights up and starts working overtime, trying to read what the silence means. Are they angry? Are they bored? Did I say something wrong? Are they judging me right now, in this pause, this very second? The psychologist Namkje Koudenburg studied exactly this. She and her colleagues found that when a smooth conversation is broken by a silence of just a few seconds, people report feeling rejected, anxious, and less connected to the group. A single 4-second pause was enough to make people feel that something in the social fabric had torn. She called it a disruption of the sense of belonging. In other words, the silence itself did not have to mean anything. Your brain assigned it a meaning, and the meaning it chose was, you are being pushed out. Think about how strange that is. A gap of a few seconds, containing no information at all, and your mind fills it with rejection. This is the same machine that scans faces for anger and reads tone of voice for threat. Given nothing, it does not relax. It generates a worst case and hands it to you as a feeling. And here is where it gets more interesting, because the meaning of silence is not fixed. It is written by culture, and different cultures have written very different rules. Researchers comparing conversations across societies have found that the length of a comfortable pause varies dramatically. In much of the Western world, a silence of even a second or two in conversation starts to feel like pressure. But in Japan, studies have documented comfortable pauses stretching to 8 seconds or more, understood not as failure, but as respect, as thinking, as weight being given to what was just said. The Finns are famous for it. In Finnish culture, silence is not an empty space, to be filled. It is a form of communication in itself, a sign that you are comfortable enough with someone that you do not need to perform for them. There is an old saying that silence is gold and talk is silver. To a Finn, a person who cannot sit in quiet is a person who is nervous, not friendly. So the discomfort you feel is not a law of nature. It is partly a script you were handed. You learned that silence in conversation is a problem to be solved, and now your body enforces that rule automatically, flooding you with the urge to fill the gap. But why does filling it feel so urgent? Why can you not simply let the quiet sit there? The answer takes us into the strangest part of your brain, the part that will not turn off, even when there is nothing to do. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you stop focusing on a task, when you fall silent, when the external world goes quiet, your brain does not go quiet with it. Instead, a network switches on. They call it the default mode network. And it is one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience. It is the brain's screensaver. Except the screensaver never stops running, and it is often not pleasant. The moment you are not occupied, the default mode network activates and turns your attention inward. It starts replaying memories, rehearsing conversations, worrying about the future, narrating your own life back to you. This is where your mind wanders. And crucially, this is where much of your self-criticism, your rumination, your low-grade anxiety lives. So here is what silence actually does to you. It removes the distraction that was keeping the default mode network quiet. The talking, the scrolling, the noise, all of it was holding your inner monologue at bay. When the silence falls, that dam breaks, and you are suddenly alone with the one voice you spend most of your day trying to outrun, your own. This is why silence can feel not just awkward, but genuinely threatening. For some people, sitting in true quiet triggers the exact thoughts they have been avoiding. The regret, the fear, the unfinished feeling, the reminder of the thing you do not want to look at. The silence did not create those thoughts. It simply stopped drowning them out. There is a study that captures this with almost brutal clarity. Researchers led by the psychologist Timothy Wilson asked people to sit alone in a room for just 15 minutes, with nothing to do but think, no phone, no book, just their own mind. Many found it so unpleasant that, when given the option, a striking number of participants chose to give themselves a mild electric shock rather than sit quietly with their own thoughts. Read that again. People chose pain over silence, not because the silence hurt, but because of what the silence let them hear. This is the modern crisis hiding inside a small discomfort. You live in the first era in human history where silence is optional. There is always a screen, always a sound, always a feed to fill the gap. And so an entire generation is learning, without ever deciding to, that the inner quiet is something to be feared and escaped, rather than entered. But that instinct, the rush to fill every silence, comes at a cost. Because it turns out that the default mode network, the very thing that makes silence uncomfortable, is also the source of some of your most valuable mental work. It is where your brain consolidates memory. It is where it makes unexpected connections between distant ideas, the solution that arrives in the shower, the insight that surfaces on a quiet walk, the sudden understanding of a problem you had stopped thinking about. These are gifts of the wandering mind. They are what your brain does when you finally stop feeding it noise. Creativity researchers have found this again and again. The mind needs idle, undirected time to do its deepest processing. Silence is not empty. Silence is the room in which your unconscious does its work. When you never allow it, you are not just avoiding discomfort. You are cutting yourself off from your own best thinking. So consider what is really happening in that elevator. in that pause at dinner, in that quiet car. Your ancient brain is scanning the silence for a predator that is not there. Your social brain is reading rejection into a gap that means nothing. Your default mode network is switching on, turning up the volume on every thought you have been avoiding all day. And a lifetime of cultural training is screaming at you to make it stop. No wonder 4 seconds feels like forever. But now that you understand it, the silence changes. The next time it falls, and that familiar squirm begins, you can recognize it for what it is. Not danger, not rejection, not something that has gone wrong, just an old alarm, wired for a world of leopards and tribes, going off in a world of elevators and dinner tables, where it is no longer needed. You do not have to obey it. You can let the silence sit. You can let the birds be quiet without assuming a hawk. You can let a pause in conversation be a pause and nothing more. And slowly, if you practice, you can learn to do the thing your ancestors could not afford to do, and most people today have forgotten how to do it all. You can be quiet and unafraid, and finally hear what your own mind has been trying to tell you underneath all that noise. Because the silence was never the threat. The silence was the one place you were finally alone enough to listen.